Welcome to the Totally Unacceptable podcast, where we tackle the pressing issues in leadership and corporate culture. I'm your host, Ed Clementi. With over 20 years of experience in mastering and successfully implementing the art and science of leadership, I believe deeply in the power of authentic, caring, and inspiring leadership, and I'm on a mission to create positive change in this space. And my vehicle? It's Inspired Fire, a company I founded to create an ecosystem of value to the leadership development market. An important part of that ecosystem is this podcast, where we bring you insights that challenge the status quo and inspire transformative change. Today, we're putting human resources under the microscope. We'll explore human resources from its beginnings in the industrial revolutions to its pivotal role in modern organizations today. Interestingly enough, despite over a century of evolution, we still grapple with fundamental issues in this space. Why are these age-old challenges so persistent? And how can we strategically address them in today's complex business environment? Join me now as we explore the historical context, discuss strategic HR models, and uncover why specialized roles like Chief People Officer and Chief Culture Officer might just be the key to unlocking a more inclusive and effective workplace. How many of you out there have had conversations with friends and colleagues that start like this? Hey, can I get some advice? I'm having issues at work. I'm getting overlooked for that promotion, overwhelmed with unrealistic workloads. My boss doesn't treat me well. And you respond with, well, have you spoken to your boss? Have you had an honest and open conversation? And some of the responses are, yeah, but it goes nowhere. And in fact, I think my honesty about the situation has hurt me. Or, even worse, I didn't bother. I know it won't go anywhere. And then the conversation naturally moves to, okay, well, if you can't speak with your boss, have you had a conversation with HR? Well, if you didn't get met with the immediate eye roll, you got responses that go something like this. No, I don't trust HR. They're always supportive of management. Or that's a useless conversation. HR is ineffective. Or I did have that conversation, and once again, it has gone nowhere. And once again, I think it might have hurt me going forward. Well, this is totally unacceptable. This scenario is all too common, and it sets the stage for our discussion today on why HR often lacks trust and is seen as ineffective, or the word I've heard many, many times, useless. I took a poll a couple of weeks ago in preparation for this episode, and the results confirmed much of what I think most of us feel to be the case. In my poll, I asked if human resources is effective in supporting employees and fostering a positive workplace culture. The options were A, yes, HR is effective. B, no, HR has become ineffective. C, it depends on the organization. Or D, HR needs a major overhaul. Exactly 80% of votes suggest HR has become ineffective and needs a major overhaul, with the remaining 20% suggesting it depends on the organization. 0 responses in favor of A, HR is effective. So why is this? Reactive rather than proactive. HR is often seen as reacting to problems after they arise instead of working proactively to create a positive work environment. Biased decision-making. Employees often feel that HR favors management, leading to a lack of impartiality in handling complaints. Ineffective conflict resolution. Many workers find that HR does not effectively resolve disputes, allowing problems to persist and even worsen. Lack of confidentiality. There is a widespread fear that HR will not keep issues confidential, which discourages employees from coming forward in the first place. There's an overemphasis on policy enforcement. HR is often seen as focusing more on enforcing company policies rather than addressing individual employee needs. Poor communication. And here is the biggie. Rewarding poor behavior. It often seems to many that those with the worst reputations get rewarded, get promoted, while culture carriers and those who do things right go unrecognized. This sends a message that the bottom line rules and poor behavior is tolerated as long as it delivers financial results. This is the kicker. This is the area where organizations lose all trust of their people. This is where stated values at the top do not match action, this is where it all starts to crumble. And all those other things we mentioned, they just add to it. The CEO's role. Let's talk about the CEO's role. For HR to truly be effective, the tone from the top must be clear. The CEO has to prioritize employee well-being and hold HR accountable if, in fact, that is what their role should be, and we will talk about that in a little bit. But right now, human resources is seen as the department that's supposed to be handling the human experience. So are CEOs holding HR accountable for the poor culture, for the administrative downfalls, for talent development, for high attrition rates, for overall culture that is toxic and not seen as conducive to good working environments? Is the CEO holding the head of human resources accountable? Is the CEO seeing his or herself as accountable for a failing culture, for high attrition rates, for low morale, for production that is poor, for lack of training, for inability to get the best talent out there? The CEO must be held accountable. It all starts at the top. And if we believe what many say, which people are our greatest asset, it all starts and ends with our people. We hear it, but are they walking the walk? Are they executing? If it's true that people are the most important asset, if it's true that it all starts with talent, well, then why is the chief human resource officer not the right-hand man or woman to the CEO? Why aren't they having maybe the most important seat at the table? They should be able to push back on the CEO when they say, hey, such and such is a great producer, but an awful human being, significantly contributing to the toxic culture that we currently have. We have to take a stand, and regardless of production, make it clear that our culture is our most important thing. Make it clear that our people are the most important thing to us. And we will not tolerate anything that disrupts the chemistry or culture that will enable us to sustain success, be resilient, be someplace people want to come to, someplace people choose to come to and choose to stay because they believe that our CEO, they believe that our management team prioritizes the right behavior. And it all comes down to accountability. Poor HR practices ultimately reflect on the CEO and the company's leadership. Holding the CEO accountable for a toxic culture is essential for a meaningful change. So how did we get here? In preparation for this episode, I thought it'd be interesting to go back in time, look at the history of HR, understand how it first came to be, what were the primary responsibilities, and how has it evolved. Maybe there was something within that history that would uncover how we got to this place. One of my first thoughts was, well, maybe it was a much simpler ask back in the day. Maybe we just continue to take traditional human resource expertise and lob on additional responsibilities that didn't match with skill sets. So let's go back in time. So the roots of HR trace back to the Industrial Revolutions. As factories grew, so did the need for managing large workforces. Early HR practices were basic, focusing on worker productivity and basic welfare. Factory owners began to realize that happier workers were more productive, leading to the first steps towards employee welfare programs. As we moved through the early 20th century, we saw the establishment of the first formal HR departments. These departments were created to handle worker grievances, ensure compliance with new labor laws, and improve overall worker satisfaction. This period marked the beginning of structured HR functions. In the 1920s, welfare capitalism arose. Progressive companies like Kodak and Procter & Gamble introduced employee benefits, job security, and profit-sharing plans. These early initiatives laid the groundwork for what is modern HR practices today, focusing on employee well-being. We move to the 1930s and we have a human relations movement. The Great Depression shifted focus to worker productivity and morale. Elton Mayo's Hawthorne studies at the Western Electric Company revealed that social relations and employee satisfaction significantly impact productivity. These findings led to the human relations movement emphasizing the importance of considering workers' psychological and social needs. World War II and women in the workforce. World War II created a significant talent shortage as men went to fight, leading to an influx of women in the workplace. This period underscored the importance of efficient workforce management and training programs as women took on roles traditionally held by men. The civil rights movement brought significant legal changes, particularly with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which outlawed employment discrimination. HR practices began focusing on diversity and inclusion, aiming to create fairer and more equitable workplaces. 1970s, strategic human resource management took form. SHRM. HR began to align more closely with business strategies, focusing on long-term goals like talent development and leadership succession planning. This strategic shift allowed HR to play a more integral role in organizational success. In the 1980s, we had technological advancements, such as human resource information systems, which automated many HR processes and improved efficiency. This era also saw HR adapting to globalization, managing diverse and geographically dispersed workforces. That continued on into the 1990s. With globalization in full swing, HR had to navigate complex international environments. This period emphasized cross-cultural management and global talent acquisition. HR departments began to focus more on strategic roles, including global mobility and international assignments. Moving into the 2000s, workforce analytics and technology. The turn of the millennium saw the rise of data analytics, and these technologies enabled more data-driven decision-making in HR, enhancing areas like talent management, employee engagement, and performance tracking. 2010s, employee experience and workplace culture takes form. In the 2010s, the focus shifted to creating positive employee experience and fostering inclusive workplace cultures. And then we move into the 2020s. So we have digital transformation and the future of work. The COVID-19 pandemic accelerated the adoption of remote work and hybrid models. HR has had to play a crucial role in navigating these changes, ensuring employee safety, maintaining productivity, and fostering a cohesive company culture despite physical distances. And here we are today. Now, it's fascinating to me to consider that many of the issues identified over a century ago remain challenges we grapple with today. The importance of worker satisfaction, the impact of social dynamics, and the need for effective leadership and inclusive cultures were all highlighted back then and continue to be critical focus areas. Despite significant advancements in technology, changes in labor laws, and evolving societal norms, organizations still struggle to create workplaces where employees feel valued, motivated, and engaged. This persistent struggle underscores the complexity of these human-centric issues and reminds us that while we've made progress, the journey towards truly understanding and optimizing the human element in work is ongoing. The lessons from the past serve as both a foundation and a reminder that there is still much work to be done to address these enduring challenges effectively. So why are we still struggling today with problems that were targeted for solution 100 years ago? Well, there are several underlying theories that explain why there is so much stagnation in addressing issues like culture and leadership and diversity and inclusion in the workplace. The first being structural inertia. That's a resistance to change. Large organizations often have structural inertia, where established procedures, hierarchies, and cultures resist significant changes. This inertia can slow down or even prevent the implementation of new practices aimed at improving leadership, culture, diversity, inclusion, and like. The second, symbolic management. This to me is a huge problem in corporate culture today. This is where it's superficial compliance, hollow values. Organizations may adopt diversity and inclusion policies, as an example, superficially to appear compliant with societal expectations without making any substantive changes. They may send out surveys to suggest that they care about employee sentiment and then do nothing about it. This is where the trust begins to crack. This is where the spoken values don't match the execution, don't match the action. The third one I'll mention, and as I said, there are a number of theories here, is economic pressures. This is where short-term focus takes priority. Organizations prioritizing short-term financial goals over long-term cultural changes. Efforts to improve leadership, culture, and inclusion are sidelined due to the immediate economic pressures. This is where poor leaders, toxic leaders, are rewarded and promoted just because they're meeting their financial goals. That's short-term vision versus thinking long-term for sustainability and resiliency and building a culture that you can be proud of. And when you take all of these three things that I mentioned and you add on lack of accountability. So even when policies are in place, the lack of enforcement mechanisms and accountability leads to stagnation without real consequences for noncompliance. Change is slow or doesn't happen at all. So these theories collectively explain why certain issues persist despite long-standing efforts, because I think we can all agree that many organizations struggle with structural inertia. Many organizations struggle with symbolic management. Many organizations struggle with economic pressures, i.e. short-term focus. And many organizations struggle with lack of accountability. You put these things together, you have slow to no progress. And here we are today. As much as this podcast is about highlighting the unacceptable, and I think we have highlighted the unacceptable state of human resources today. And just to remind everyone, it is an organization within organizations that is seen as useless, is seen as ineffective, is seen as an organization you cannot trust, is certainly not seen as an organization of the people, for the people. It's certainly not seen like that. Now, I do want to say this. I have a lot of friends who are in human resources positions or were in human resources positions. And many of them are wonderful people who got into human resources to help people in the first place. And they struggle with many of these things that we've talked about. They want to do the right thing, but they get consumed with the bureaucracy. They get consumed with the things that I just mentioned, whether it be the structural inertia or the lack of accountability or the short-term focus, whatever it might be, they get consumed. And at the end of the day, they need jobs and they have families to feed. They want to do the right thing, but they're stuck. That's why I wanted to create this podcast, because much of this gets discussed in one-on-one conversations. Much of this gets discussed in small circles. But I don't know that I've heard much of this getting discussed in bigger forums. You hear about leadership, you hear about culture, but who's talking about human resources and the fact that it's ineffective and useless and not seen as an organization you can trust? Who's talking about it? Where are human resource chiefs being held accountable? Where are the CEOs being held accountable for a toxic culture? And they have chief human resource officers. Are they not responsible for it? Maybe they're not. We'll talk about that in a minute. Many are talking about toxic culture. Many are talking about the fact that upwards of 70% of people in leadership positions have no skill or training to be in those leadership positions. Who's talking about the fact that nobody believes surveys are worth a damn? Who's talking about this and doing something about it? It feels like human resource officers go unnoticed. Chief human resource officers go unnoticed. They get a pass. The responsibilities that have been put into this organization are far too much for the skill sets of the people in those positions. Think about it. At one time, it was administrative. If we go back into the history, maybe HR has grown too big for its own good. Maybe there's a skill set mismatch. Maybe we've tried to put too much under one hood. Whatever the answer is, and I want to explore an answer because this podcast is not just, as I said before, it's not a complaining podcast. This podcast is meant to shine the light on where things are going wrong. And not be afraid to do so. This podcast is meant to talk about the things that we know in our hearts are totally unacceptable, but they just continue. They just continue the way they were. If we want to make an impact, if we want to make a difference, we have to talk about the issues. You have to first accept that you have a problem. Anything I've ever done, anything I've ever tried to solve, I first try to understand the problem and then accept the problem. Once you own the problem, accept that you have a problem, now you can move forward. Far too often, we don't take the first step of accepting we have a problem. Well, listen, we have a problem here. No one thinks this organization is effective. I understand there are probably some organizations that have figured out how to do this, or maybe they just stick to the original role and it's far more administrative. Hire people, onboard the people, make sure they get in, make sure they're getting their benefits, all the administrative aspects, very much a reactive kind of function. But when you think about what it is today, if we're truly encapsulating leadership and culture and talent development and diversity and inclusion and all these things into human resources, well, then we have to evolve the skill set. Maybe there has to be some specialization there. But I think we can all agree that the way it is today is ineffective. Hey, I hope you're enjoying this episode. If you are, you might also love my weekly newsletter, The Firestarter. It's packed with 3 to 5 minute reads on leadership, growth, and inspiration. To sign up, just click the link in the description of this episode. Now back to the show. What does good look like in this space? Well, if we agree that the human experience sits under one roof, if we agree that it likely is the most important function, if we agree that people are, and we hear it all the time, people are our most important asset, without the right talent, we have nothing. If we can agree with all that stuff, which I hope we do, what does good look like? Well, good looks like an organization where culturally we're getting it right, where talent wants to come to the organization. Talent wants to stay with the organization. Why would talent want to stay with the organization? Well, talent walks into the organization. Talent feels genuinely heard, appreciated. Talent feels like values that are spoken are matched in action. Talent feels like leadership is exceptional. Talent feels like opportunity is abundant. Talent feels cared about. Talent feels like they understand the vision. Talent feels like there's growth. Talent feels like they're making an impact. Talent feels inspired and motivated. Talent feels like they're part of something that matches their values, part of something they believe in. That's getting it right. So if we think about what the ultimate state is for an organization, and if we agree that what we're talking about here is the people experience, and we understand what the end goal is, which is to create a wonderful, fantastic culture, a culture that people are proud of, a culture that embodies its values, a culture that people will stick with through thick and thin, a culture that people want to be part of, not because they have to pay their bills, but because they want to, because they believe in the leadership. I think the core functions of building a wonderful culture is employee engagement, regular feedback, recognition programs, social events. How many organizations have completely done away with social events? And I know there's lots of concern there from a legal and compliance perspective. But again, you bring the right leaders in. You bring the right talent in that embodies the values. You do your job well to bring the right talent in. There's less concern about that. And if something happens, you deal with it, but it's less likely. But boy, oh boy, building a team through social events, getting to know people, getting people to feel like they're part of a family away from their family. It's lost. Offsites, retreats. First, it was an expense management thing. Now it's a legal and compliance thing. And look, I get all those concerns, but again, if you're building the right way, if you're holding people accountable the way you should hold people accountable, these concerns are less and less. I certainly hope we're not moving in a direction where we can't have social events without team members. We can't have offsite retreats. We can't build camaraderie. We can't have a sense of community. But this is a complex topic. This is an important topic. It needs real expertise, employee engagement, someone to focus on it who gets it all. Transparent communication, open channels, clarity and honesty. Again, building trust. It needs communication experts. Professional development, training programs, career pathways, skill development that makes sense for each employee. Well, that needs expertise. Work-life balance, flexible work arrangements where appropriate, wellness programs, inclusive culture, fair compensation and benefits, empowerment and autonomy, leadership development. Are we building the next leaders? Are we teaching people how to lead? Or are we just promoting without any training or ability gained? That's when the gap between the top of the house and the values, that's where the cracks start to get bigger and bigger. Where you have leaders at the top of the house who have gone through trainings, hopefully, who are really good leaders, who act aligned with those values. But then as you get to the other levels, the gap starts to widen. Well, maybe it's because those people were not taught how to lead. Those people don't know the skills, but they were promoted into those positions and left to figure it out. That's a failure. That is a failure. Leadership development, crucial to building sustainable cultures. Leadership is a wonderful art to master. It's one of the best opportunities we're all going to have to make a lasting impact. It's an art and skill that's underdeveloped, that no one is really investing in. That is a leadership failure when you're not training your next generation of leaders. Creating a positive work environment, creating a comfortable and inspiring physical workspace, that's crucial. Feedback and continuous improvement. Don't just show up to a review and give people poor feedback. They should be getting feedback continuously so that they can get better. And they can talk about in a performance review the feedback they received and what they did to get better, what they did to improve. Not to be shocked because they hadn't heard anything for 6, 9, 12 months, only to find out that they're not cutting it. Unacceptable. Community and social responsibility. This is another thing. Engaging in activities that align with the values of the company, of the corporation, allows employees to contribute to societal causes, volunteer opportunities, not to check a box, but because it matters, because it aligns with your values. So if you focus on all these areas, I think you start to back into what the ultimate goal of building a sustainable culture you can be proud of against a mission and value set that is aligned. That's the goal. But again, you need the right skill sets. You need the right leadership. So if we agree that these are the answers to the ultimate end state, do we agree that the current structure of human resources is fit to solve for those needs? I'm going to argue no. And I'm quite frankly starting to think I'm not a huge fan of human resources as the brand name any longer. Human resources. Human resources. I don't know that I like that anymore. I think if I were starting from scratch and I were CEO of a large organization and I were thinking about what the ultimate end state was in terms of culture, in terms of the expectations of leadership, in terms of the expectations of resiliency and sustainability, diversity and inclusion, all these things, I think I might do away with the human resources term, the human resources brand. I think it does all go under one roof, but perhaps it's something like, we've heard this out there, Chief People Officer, or perhaps the organization is more centered around people experience. Perhaps the leader of that organization is Chief People Officer. no longer the chief human resource officer, but chief people officer. And underneath the chief people officer, which by the way, is perhaps the most important executive member of the CEO's management team. Chief people officer. Again, if we agree, if we truly believe that it all begins and ends with the people, if we all agree that the people are the most important asset, if we all agree that if we don't have talent, we have nothing, the chief people officer is the person the chief executive officer needs to be speaking with every day. How happy are our people is a question that should be at the start of every executive management meeting. Are they happy to be here? Are they proud to be here? People will always do more than is expected when they genuinely feel appreciated. And let's be clear, people want to be part of something. People want to feel motivated, inspired. People want to feel like they're more than just a number. People want to feel appreciated. And when they do, when all those things are met, it's amazing what people can do. That's how resiliency is formed. That's how sustainability is formed. People will take hits for organizational leadership like that. People will stick it out through thick and thin for organizations like that. So if we believe that the people are the most important thing, that we have nothing if we don't have the people, the chief people officer is perhaps the most important executive team member on the CEO's management team. So let's start with chief people officer. And then underneath that, we have a chief diversity officer. We have a chief talent officer. We have a chief culture officer. Chief people officer oversees the overall people experience. The overall people experience. Have you ever had the situation where you're talking to someone who comes to you for advice and they say, hey, I just got this offer. It's a great offer from a financial standpoint. It's a great offer from a title perspective. But I got to tell you, there's something bothering me. I had 2 or 3 other offers that they weren't as much money. The title might not have been as good, but boy, were they professional. Boy, did they make me feel like I was important. And this other organization that I've accepted the role with, as I'm going through the onboarding process, it is a disaster. Lack of response. People I'm dealing with don't seem to know what they're doing. They continually have to get back to me. They're not that nice. And I'm really second guessing if I'm making the right decision. Even for less money, even though the money's better, even though the title's better, I might have to rethink this. This happens every day where talent acquisition has gotten wrong. These organizations think that people should feel grateful to be part of the organization versus the other way around. People are making career and life decisions to come join your organization. You need to make them feel like you want them, that you got lucky to have that talent in your organization, not the other way around. And if that does happen, and you are the chief people officer of a firm, who are you holding accountable for that experience? Perhaps it's your chief talent officer, who manages talent acquisition, development, and succession planning, talent retention. If you have an issue on diversity, equity, and inclusion, who are you holding accountable? Perhaps it's your chief diversity officer. And if for some reason the culture of this organization is lacking, if for some reason production is lacking, if for some reason the rumors around the water cooler are starting to fester, are starting to grow, if for some reason the culture of the organization is nearing toxicity, who are you holding accountable? Perhaps it's your chief culture officer, who makes sure that the values spoken from a management team perspective are held up by its leaders. One of the things I keep hearing is, the spoken word at the top is wonderful, but as you get down the organization, it starts to dissipate, it starts to disappear. There's a disconnection between the leaders on the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th levels and the leaders on 1, 2, and 3 levels. Why is that? Where is the crack? Well, leadership level 2, leadership level 3 are not holding leadership level 4, 5, and 6 accountable, are letting it be okay, are letting things slide. Why? Perhaps short-term focus, bottom line results. The trade-off for ethics, integrity, values, leadership at its best. And when you see the crack, what are you doing about it? Accepting the unacceptable? If I were a CEO of a major 70,000 person organization, I'd have a chief people officer by my side. That chief people officer would have someone in charge of talent, someone in charge of diversity, someone in charge of culture, and they would sure as hell be held accountable if any of those areas were faltering. If we couldn't bring in talent, if we couldn't retain talent, if we had diversity issues, equity and inclusion issues, if the culture was lacking, they would be held accountable by the chief people officer. And if they weren't, I'd have a new chief people officer. It starts at the top, but it has to make its way all the way through. To me, this is the new HR model. And you can disagree, and that's fine. But this is not a podcast of just talking about what's going wrong, but this is a podcast of suggesting how it could go right. I have a solution. It's a suggested solution. It's probably not perfect, and that's fine. At least there's a solution. And I always say, when people ask me, what's the secret to the successes you had? I said, well, be a problem solver. There's plenty of problems to solve. Not enough problem solvers. So here's a solution. Chief people officer. Let's do away with the human resource term. I don't know. It just doesn't feel right to me. But chief people officer, armed and staffed appropriately to tackle all the areas that have now been pushed inside of this important function. Elevate it to its level of importance. Perhaps this is the solution, or perhaps you have a better one. I would love to hear. As we scrutinize the state of human resources today, it's clear that the system is fundamentally flawed and often perceived as ineffective or even useless. It's time for a profound reflection on the true purpose of this department. We need to ensure that the mission and the expertise is aligned with the genuine needs of the organization and its culture. The top position, focusing on people, should be directly linked to the CEO, occupying perhaps the most crucial seat at the leadership table, embodying the belief that people are the most valuable asset of any organization. The term human resources may have indeed become outdated. Perhaps a shift towards the human experience or people experience with a chief people officer at the helm. This new structure would focus on key areas of expertise such as culture, talent acquisition, administration, and development, ensuring a comprehensive approach to managing the workforce. Organizations must stop accepting the status quo and merely adding responsibilities to this department to check yet another box. Instead, they should delve deep into the fundamental purpose of this department, structuring it to genuinely support and develop their people. It's time to bring back purpose, integrity, and effectiveness to this vital function. The backbone of any organization is indeed its people. Make no mistake, and they deserve to be taken care of. One thing I know for sure is that until organizations, CEOs, and chief people officers make an intentional decision to reward and showcase leaders of integrity and genuine care, and hold those who don't accountable, regardless of the bottom line, people will not trust or have faith in the commitment to a great culture you say you have. The era of neglect and complacency must end. We owe it to our employees to create great environments where they can thrive. Let's demand better. Let's be the change. It's time to revolutionize the way we view and manage our most critical asset, our people. Anything less is unacceptable.